there, and welcome back to a brand new series of coming out stories from What Goes On Media. I'm your host, Emma Goswell. We're now up to series 5, and can you believe this? We've also been going 5 years. Now, when my lovely friend and producer Sam suggested we start this project, do you know what? I was unsure that we really needed a resource like this. I thought things were pretty good for LGBTQ plus people in 2018. I was wrong then, and I'm even more wrong now. It breaks my heart, to be honest, to think about the fact that things are even tougher for our community right now. In the States, trans kids are having their rights eroded. A moral panic there has even led some states to banning drag queens in certain public spaces. On my side of the pond, conversion therapy still hasn't been banned, and our own Prime Minister stood up at his party conference in the city I call home to say that the British public are being bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be, adding a man is a man and a woman is a woman, whatever that means. Transphobia is on the rise, and public opinion 58% of Brits believe that people should be able to change the sex on their birth certificate if they wish. But in 2022, that had gone down to just 30%. Being trans has always been tough, let's face it. But sadly, it seems it isn't going to get any easier anytime soon. Now, I'm passionate about sharing trans and non-binary stories, so I thought we would start this season with an iconic trans person who's spent their life breaking taboos and educating the world about the trans experience. Juno Roche is the author behind Queer Sex, Trans Power, Gender Explorers, and her latest book is called A Working Class Family Ages Badly. Her life story really is quite remarkable. I don't want to give any spoilers, but she really has faced adversity on so many levels and always bounced back a strong, inspirational woman. I could have spoken to her all day, to be honest. I caught up with her recently in her mountain home in rural Spain, where she now lives. Now, I've used some female pronouns when introducing her there, but as she explained to me, her identity is something that is quite complex and ever-evolving.
I don't know. It's really the older I get, the less certain I am about how I identify, and the less important it becomes in a way. I suppose the only thing that I'd say is that I'm definitely queer, but my queerness now, the older I get, seems to be formed kind of in opposition to things like capitalism and fascism and homophobia and transphobia, and my queerness seems to be much more rooted in that. And I suppose at one point in my life it was much more rooted in desire and also activism, and now it seems to be rooted in much more in opposition. Like I hate the idea that I wouldn't die and people wouldn't know that I'm queer. So for example, I don't have a gender recognition certificate.
Ah, okay, that's important.
Which feels really kind of like, in this day and age, that feels almost like a risk. It didn't feel so risky when I first decided that I didn't want to do it. But like I wanted to die with with like a different beginning and a different ending. You know, I didn't want to die, but when I do die, I want to die. That's important to me.
And also, you know, were you to get married in the UK, you would be referred to as husband on your wedding day, because I've spoken to trans women who have had that situation.
Yeah, and in a way, I'd rather have that argument. Listen, the chances of me getting married in the UK are almost nil and void. But I'd still rather, because I feel like I've got skin in the fight still, and I feel like that's really important to me. It's really important that when I die, that there's questions, the questions that were always there are still there. Because, so my identity feels even looser than it is now, even in terms of like, I think if I lived my life again, my idea of my sexuality would be a lot clearer. But, you know, that feels very much like a different lifetime away from now.
Shall we go back to the beginning then? What was your experience growing up? And sort of, I guess you kind of knew that you were different, but how did that express itself when you were young? Was it about your gender identity or was it about your sexuality?
It was about both, really. So really what came first was gender. What came first? And in my third book, I think it was, I opened the book writing about being 8 years old about 1972 and kind of coming out in the playground because the boys always called me Pansy or a Pansy at school. And
Really?
And I loved the name. I thought, fuck that, I like the name, Pansy. I'll call myself Pansy. So I literally persuaded everyone to call me Pansy. And
Oh, wow. You owned it.
I really owned it. More than owned it, I loved it. I loved the name. And I don't think they got it. And in a way, I completely disempowered them because like I almost took the high ground without realising I was taking the high ground. But yeah, so that went okay until I went home and asked my dad, who was around then, if he could. And he was incensed, really. So that kind of shut that down. And in a way, I always think when people talk about trans kids and stuff, and when people, especially the people that talk bollocks about them, it's like, if I'd been allowed to just carry on being, I doubt very much that I would have wasted 10 years as a drug addict and all the other stuff that came with that, really, all the other kind of like nightmares that came with that. But anyway, no, I was told I couldn't be that, and I was told why I couldn't be that. I was told that I couldn't be that because it meant that I was a sissy or a puff or no one used the word effeminate, but that word became very clear to me at a certain point in my young teenageness. And I thought, well, what group am I most closely linked to? And, that was kind of gay men at that point in time, So I thought, well, that's what I must be then. I must be that because apparently I'm a sissy.
Because in the 70s, you wouldn't have had any sort of trans role models or understood what the experience was or the identity was.
None at all. I can't. The first thing I remember was, I think I remember an article in the newspaper about April Ashley. I think I remember that. I love that she did the foreword, actually wrote the foreword for my second book. This isn't me doing a kind of, I'm far too old and uncaring about any of that kind of notions of fame to give a fuck about any of that stuff. But it really mattered to me because I remember seeing her on the front of a newspaper, and I don't know when that was, but being vilified, really, being completely vilified, being beautiful, but being vilified, like not being enough. So I saw that and I kind of knew something, but at that point we didn't even have the words for anything. The only words you would have had would have been sex change and sissy or queer or puff, or those kind of words existed everywhere, on television, on the news. They existed everywhere. These words, sometimes it really bugs me when I listen to people talk about Section 28, when younger people, and they go, oh, it ruined my life, and I go, what do you think happened before Section 28?
I was at school sort of before it, and I was like, we didn't need it because nobody talked about LGBT issues anyway. We didn't need Section 28.
Yeah, no one. I mean, it was a horrendous place. So it's like, but going back to the kind of coming out. So yeah, I'd come out in 1972. I'd come out as, that's when my gender first came out. So I think I came out as trans in 1972 in the playground, running away from the boys who were calling me Pansy, and I was going, yes, I'm Pansy, but they were calling me Pansy, and I thought they were running after me, but they weren't. I mean, maybe they were, but in the way that I didn't really want.
And did you articulate it as in you wanted to be a girl, you wanted to be a woman?
So I had a teacher called Miss Honey, she was called, and that's completely true. She was lovely.
Wow.
And she always carried spangles. I don't know if you remember, spangles were like this sweet in the 70s. She always
love them
spangles in her bags, and she would always have like butterscotch, like a version of spangles that were butterscotch, which I loved. I know because I used to steal them from her bag. It was terrible. So like, but I said to her, everyone calls me Pansy. Will you call me Pansy? And she said, I will call you Pansy. It's completely true. In carpet time. So back then, I don't know if they do that now. In the 70s, there would be like a round carpet in the classroom, and we would go there and we'd sit there for story time. So carpet time became known as story time became known as carpet time. So she said, I'll call you Pansy on carpet time. Thinking, I suppose in her mind, that it was completely harmless, that it was completely, because no one really talked about gender issues then. Certainly you wouldn't have expected an 8-year-old. But I was always kind of fairly precocious, not in terms of, my family was a tough family, so I had to fight. I had to kind of fight for stuff. And I wasn't a fighter. So I had to find every other way to fight, apart from fighting. My family, bless them, could all fight. They were, proper bruisers. So I found every other way of fighting. I had to be clever, be this, be that, be sharp, be funny, be all that stuff. So she said that she would call me that in carpet time. But what happened was that she kind of weaponized it. And she didn't realise what she was doing. She wasn't doing it horribly, but she would say, if I was naughty, if she caught me stealing sweets from her bag, she would send me off of the carpet to the corner, and then she would call me by my other name. So in a way, I learned very early on that something about me could be weaponized. And so I think that made me a bit resilient. But like I said, so I went back home, said to my dad who was around then, I want you to call me this. He said, no, you can't do this because you're being whatever. And I think the rest of, probably my siblings told me as well. Certainly my older siblings would have said, you can't do that. Don't be ridiculous. This is, unless you're a puff. And I thought, well, I must be then. That's what I must be, because I'm certainly not like you lot. So I must be that then, because...
And then at 8, you don't really have a sexuality, do you, necessarily? You might know, you might have an inkling, but you're not really sexualised.
It was about, I'd always felt really unlike I was unlike my family. I don't mean that, when and I've just literally written about this now, when I was, I don't know, around that same time, I wrote a letter. Maybe I was a bit younger, maybe I was a bit older, I can't remember, but certainly before I left primary school, I wrote a letter to one of my teachers saying, I've worked out that I'm adopted because I'm nothing like my family, and I've worked out that my parents are really Olivia Newton-John and Adam Faith, because we all have blonde hair, and none of my family had blonde hair, and I think that I would be much happier with them. And I actually drew a picture with the letter that I sent to my teacher. I drew a picture of us sitting on a couch, and I labelled all the stuff. I labelled the picture with things like table, dad named Adam Faith. I mean, it's just bizarre. So in a way, I always knew that I was really not like my family, because they were really different. I liked going to school. I liked reading books. I liked quietness. I didn't like the noise and the anger and the kind of stuff that was the kind of background to my kind of childhood.
And did they tolerate you? Did you get bullied at school for it?
I came from a tough family, so no, I didn't. No one would bully me. No one. And if you come from that kind of family, I mean, sometimes it would happen, and if it did happen, it would be really intense, because someone would feel like they'd broken through the toughness of the family and got to the kind of... But in a way, I was always quite tough, because, I wasn't like I came from a tough family, so I'd been used to getting a few slaps. It wasn't like that wasn't a kind of big deal to me in a way.
Yeah.
I would say that, no, I wasn't really hideously bullied. But that didn't mean that I felt homeless in a way, because I didn't have a community. And most people have a kind of sense of safety or something with their family, or a sense of belonging, which I didn't have. I just thought, they're all fucking mad. They all want to fight. This is happening, that's happening.
When you got to sort of teenage years then, What were you doing in terms of dating? Were you trying to fit in and date girls, or did you decide, really? I must be gay?
Yeah, a really tiny bit tried to fit in, and it never really worked in any way, shape or form. I did the thing that happened back then. It's like, if you try and ban something or make it illegal or make it wrong, people still have, teenagers that are growing up, you still have this set of feelings that are really romantically driven. That's not to say that they're not sexually driven, but they're really also romantically and exploratory driven. So I find myself in public toilets trying to romantically find the answer at 15.
Really?
And 16. Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a really common thing back then. I mean, cottaging was really common, because that's where people could meet people.
And you're 15, you couldn't go to gay bars, could you?
Well, they didn't exist, really. What bars would have existed? Maybe a town would have one bar or one night in one bar. I think that was the kind of deal. And I was young, and I'd been going to clubs with my sister since I was quite young. My sister lived up Brixton, and I used to go and stay with my sister, and we'd go to clubs.
So you were in London, so you were in the thick of it, really.
In the thick of it, But in a way, not really, because if you're not in the know, you're not in the know. And at that age, you're not in the know. So I would go out with my sister. We would go to clubs down Wardour Street, and I would dress up like at 15, maybe even at 14, I would go out with my sister. I would dress up thinking that I looked older, and I patently didn't. But I think it was a really different time when people didn't really check or look. I don't know how that happened, but it did. So no, I didn't know. So I literally then would do that. I would have sex, and it would be awful. It would be horrible. And I would be looking for, it sounds stupid, but I'd be looking for like my first love in some grotty toilets. And that happened, I'm sure, I won't be the only person that happened to, or maybe still happens to in places where there is no scene, where it is kind of frowned upon or whatever. I can't guarantee, because sometimes it's very easy to go, well, that was back in the late 70s. It's all changed now, and maybe it is, but I mean, all I see is clubs closing down and places closing down, and
everyone just meets online, don't they, on Grindr?
Yeah,
dating apps, don't they?
So it's a kind of it's a different version of that same thing. I mean, it's better, it's more empowered, we have more kind of skin and more autonomy and stuff like that. But so I did that, and it was horrible. And sometimes I ended up getting cramps and stuff. So I'd be like this. I think I'm writing my fourth book. I forget how many books I've written now. Fourth book about being this called assembly, kind of itching because I had cramps, like itching through the Lord's Prayer. And it's like, it's kind of comical now, but it was really sad, because what I wanted was to be like everyone else at school that was kind of falling in love.
But actually what you were doing is putting yourself at risk.
Completely at risk.
Of more than crabs. And, all sorts.
If you think that this is late 70s, and I would say that my coming out year was 1983, I think it was. That was when I actually came out. But we are just before the AIDS pandemic.
Yeah.
And you've got like legions of people, I would say, like me, that are going to places to meet people, to meet someone, to fall in love, to whatever. And, for me, there was the added thing that I definitely was like, I would have described myself then as being like a teenage girl. That's what I would have been, in a public toilet, having sex. For me, there were all kind of levels of kind of messed upness and kind of stuffness, but essentially looking for a husband.
And did you have any relationships, or was it all very short-lived?
No, very short-lived. All very short-lived. And I think partially because of the kind of gender thing, that was always a kind of issue, really, because I wasn't bringing the right stuff to the table. And so then I went off to college, and I went to Winchester to do art, and that was around the time that Boy George, Karma Chameleon, I think it was, came out.
That was 83. I remember 83 very well. That was the year I went to school in this country.
Yeah. So I went to Winchester then, and all of a sudden I just thought, when I was at art college from my family, so I'd come from my family and gone to art college, and it was just completely overwhelming, really. So I remember in some point in 1983, I can't remember the month, but in maybe June, July, when I finished at Winchester and I had to go home for a short time, and I went to stay with my mum. By that point, my parents had been separated for quite a bit of time, and I don't remember what magazine it was I'd read, but I'd read a magazine, and I've got a really funny feeling it's like an art magazine at art college, and they said that there was a film night at this nightclub, like a gay nightclub. And they probably would have called it a homosexual nightclub. Maybe that's what they would have said. Like there was a film night, a homosexual night or a gay nightclub called Heaven, which was under the arches in Charing Cross. And it was like a film night where they would be showing art house films. And I thought, I'm going to leave that open at my mum's house, and then she'll see it and she'll know. But she'll also think it might be an art thing. So I said,
clever.
Bear in mind now, I've never ever, I've got no concept. This is the age of, I've been at art school listening to like Boy George and New Romantics and whatever. I'm kind of dressed in that kind of way, and in a way kind of hopelessly naive, but in another way not naive, because you couldn't be naive and come from my family about a whole host of things, drugs, etc., etc. So like, in one way really naive and in another way not naive. So I say to my mum, I'm going to this nightclub and I think it's just men there, but it's for a film night. And she says to me, I've always known. And I say, okay, I'm going to go now. Just go and brush out the door.
So you didn't continue the conversation then, no?
Well, we kind of did very quickly after that. But like, I went to heaven and it was like, I mean, in one way, it was just so relieving to be there. But in another way, as someone that kind of felt like they were still different than the people there. Because I went there and I've gone there in like rolled up chinos because that was like fashion. It was like this whole Nick Hayward Haircut 100. I'd gone there with like...
espadrilles, I remember.
Espadrilles, I think I wore.
Yeah?
And to heaven. And a big white shirt. And to see what was apparently supposed to be like a film night. I mean, they did show some films, but I would say that they weren't necessarily art films. There was like a back room there used to be like a back room or a dark room upstairs, and that's where the films were. I did spend some time in there with my chinos and espadrilles, but I thought it was fantastic. I just felt such freedom and such. I don't know, I love the gay community. I love the protection that they gave me, even though I always felt distinctly different from them. And they could sense that, I think. I always had really quite difficult relationships with gay men that would say, I don't know what it is about you, but I can't be faithful to you. And I'd think, I kind of get it, really. I would understand it. There'd be something that, I needed to kind of to grow and move on. But I mean, so I defined as being gay for a long time, really. And really weirdly, I met people that very first night that I still know now, which I think is an amazing thing. Yeah. I met people that very first night, and I would say that that we bonded because we're very similar. And a couple of us have done exactly the same journey. And so we became friends that night. Isn't that a weird thing in the whole kind of club of...
I was just about to say to you, I bet you weren't the only person in that room out of hundreds of people who identified at the time as gay men who have transitioned, who were actually trans women, but they went down the gay man route. I know plenty of people.
And back then, you could only be there were like two kinds of people in heaven that night, and they were clones, people that had big moustaches and more leather, people that were seen as being horrendously kind of femme, and they would be, are you a drag queen? Are you, so you fell into one camp. Like you're either a female impersonator or you're a clone. And, obviously there were other people. I'm not saying that there weren't other people, so don't anyone at me. Well, you can't anymore because I'm hardly on social media. And frankly, I really don't give a fuck anymore. I'm 60 next year, so I'm going to say what I'm going to say. But there were kind of two groups, and if you didn't fit into them, you didn't really... No, so I went along with that thinking, well, I must be somewhere in between these people. Well, I'll lose the espadrilles for a start because they're not working in this place, and the chinos. And I think to a certain extent, I just became part of I became part of that whole kind of London West End, taboo, kinky galinky, really kind of like uber West End scene, really. And it worked for me because it was so queer. It was... Lee Bowery, it was that kind of time and that kind of group that we're mixed in. And I lived in a house, we squatted a big house in Camden and lived with a group of people that were drag queens and bikers and models and artists. And, it was a fantastic time. But I still never found, although I had long-term relationships, I very quickly descended into kind of drug addiction because I just I couldn't quite make any of it work out and make it make sense. And so then kind of switching forward a bit. So that's like my 20s, I did that.
And did you come out to your dad as well and to your siblings? How did that go?
Well, my mum was just brilliant. My mum's been, my mum is like a fucking rock. She's like, at the end of the book, I say, or at the start of the book, I can't remember, at the end of the start of the book, I say that I love these mountains, but not more than I love my mum. It's like my mum has always been, she'd fight for me. She'd do time. She would fight. She would just do anything for her kids. And for me, she was always really, she was like, what you are is what you are, and that doesn't change anything. And yes, she'd say really crap things sometimes, but she would say it lovingly. And so she did, and because she did, then my siblings did. Although I don't know to what extent they kind of whatever, but you wouldn't fuck with my mum. You wouldn't, and I don't think that my dad, who'd gone by then anyway, I don't think that he would fuck with mum. And he'd gone by then. And he was very much a kind of like, a kind of puff, and still probably is to this day. But I think still has a kind of real massive kind of, we don't see each other very much, but has a and he's very ill, but still has a massive respect for my kind of tenacity to become me and to be me. So when I just scroll forward, most of my 20s, most of my 30s, was spent as on drugs and doing all the wrong things, really, being homeless, being up to no good. I ended up being, and then I was diagnosed with HIV, and I also went to university. So I wasn't all kind of like, I was this kind of mad mix of being like, oh God, I'm having a really bad day. What would make it better is going to university. That's what would make it better. So.
But you were a functioning drug addict then, weren't you? I mean, you were going to university.
The really weird thing is that about 4 months ago, I thought, let me check, and I'm 60 next year, let me check and see how much I pay towards my state pension, thinking, oh my God, I've been so messed up, I must have only paid like a few years. And I paid 34 years and 8 months. And I rang my friend, I rang my friend who I've known since I was 17, 18. We're still really, really close, love each other dearly. And I said, can you believe this? I literally, and she said to me, yeah, I can believe it, because you used to work, you were doing all the wrong things on the street in the daytime. And then at night time, you'd go and work legally on the porn lines all night in Victoria. You'd be there from 8 o'clock at night till 3 the next morning. Every night you'd do that, paying tax. She said, you always worked. You always hustled. You would you would have remembered that. And I was like, no, you're right, I did do that. And then I worked for that furniture shop in Hackney. And I used to do gear out the back, and I used to go and score crack on the estate, but I was still working. And I was like, wow. So I think I was really functioning. There was only a tiny bit of time when I wasn't functioning. And then, I by that point, I'd been diagnosed as having full-blown AIDS. So, gosh. And I ended up being very ill, and I remember this completely. I ended up having to go into the Sussex Beacon, then was a hospice. And I was sent down from London to go to the Sussex Beacon. I don't think they expected me to die, but certainly I was like really not well at all. And I was, there was a combination of drugs, long-term drug abuse, and HIV and AIDS.
Well, certainly, I mean, to be honest, a lot of people would have expected you to die. You probably had that thought yourself. I mean,
they did write out that I got a form called a DS 1500, which was a entitlement to death benefits. It said at the top, not expected to live longer than 6 months. And lots of people I knew at that time aren't alive anymore. I did lose them. Lots of people I love dearly. And you can't explain that to people now. You can't explain, even to people that are kind of resurrecting ACT UP or whatever in 2020. You can't explain to them what it was like back then to lose your friends. Literally like that. Boom, 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 one by one.
And you can understand why people turn to drugs, given that how awful a time it was.
Well, I turned to them anyway. I was on them before, but there was no thing for me to get off. Although I was at university and I'd found philosophy, and I'd found philosophers like Foucault and Baudrillard. So in a way, there was this pull for me to kind of be alive, but I didn't keep myself alive. I didn't battle through. There was no whatever. So anyway, I went into the Sussex Beacon, and back then you would have everything done for you. There was this, someone would come in and rub your feet, and you'd get like aromatherapy. And because I was a junkie, they brought in a therapist to talk to me about trying to get off of drugs. And
I think it still exists, doesn't it, the Sussex Beacon?
I think so, but I think it's probably really different now. But it saved my life. That meeting that therapist there saved my life, because they said to me, what's wrong? And I said, I think I'm in, because you would say this then. I said, I think I'm not in the right body, or the way that people see me isn't the way I feel inside. And I've never said that before. And now that I've said it, and I remember saying to the therapist, now that I've said it, I think I have to kill you. before you leave the room, because I don't think I
quite brutal.
I know, but the thing is that I didn't mean it. Just felt so terrifying to say it out loud. To actually, because I hadn't said it out loud since I was 8 in 1972, and here I was in 1991, 1992, I think it was. Here I was, kind of saying it aloud, and they said, "Have you ever heard of this word called transsexual?" That's what people used to say back then. Have you ever heard of transsexuals? And I was like, I kind of think I have, and I don't want to hear it, and I don't want it to be true, but it is true. And yeah, so that was like the start of it.
So that was a massive awakening that took 20 years really in developing, didn't it? It took a long
it took a long time to be able to, because you couldn't back then. There were no, who would you have talked to? It wasn't like you could even talk to parents. It wasn't like there was anything. It's like if I think about my life and writing a book like Gender Explorers, which is my third book, where I went round and interviewed parents and their younger kids and teenagers, and all of whom who are kind of like really battling with gender at such a young age, so brilliantly battling with at a young age. We didn't have any of that at all. There was no existence. There would be people. I remember down the road from us, there was a man who apparently used to like dressing in women's clothes. That's how people described them. And I think they were trans, but they were described as a man who liked dressing in women's clothes and no one should go near them. There was nothing at all that was like that would give you any kind of sense of it at all. But that day in there, and I distinctly remember I was so ill in like the hospice. But that day I just thought, I am not fucking dying before I've done something about this. And I literally, that's on my life. I thought, I am not dying. I think I did not then, but as soon as I could, I went to see my mum and I said, this is the deal. This is who I am. I can't die with a headstone that says he on it. I can't die. Oh, that can't happen. And so it was like a really, so that was like my real, and I can picture myself in me and my mum in her kitchen. Yeah.
And what did she say?
Again, she was like a big bear. She just said, she said to me, when you were 5 years old, her mum had said to her, she said, I remember it. Her mum used to have a shop on Rye Lane in Peckham. And she said, walking down Rye Lane with me, I was a 5-year-old, and her mum stopped and was looking at children's babies' clothes in a window, and she was looking at girls' clothes, and she said to my mum, that's not a boy you've got. And my mum said, I'd never told you that, but that was completely what she said when you were 5 years old.
Your grandma clocked it.
My grandma completely clocked it when I was like that, and she said, that's not a boy. I went on, however it is I describe myself now, definitely said that was more right than wrong. The one thing that I've never been in my whole life is male or a boy or a man. Those things have never worked. They've just never been part of me. Listen, I always say to people, honestly, if even 5% of me or 10% of me had felt male, I would have stayed with it because it would have been easier. Trust me, being trans has been a tough gig, a beautiful gig, but a tough gig.
That's a very good point that some of the transphobes need to listen to.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Why would you ever choose to go through everything you've gone through?
Absolutely. And being someone that was HIV positive, I couldn't get any care, I couldn't get any surgery, I couldn't get any help from the NHS for years and years. I couldn't. But I knew on that day when I said to that therapist, who I love dearly, I don't know them, I don't need to know them, they don't need to know this, but when I said that out loud to them, it changed my life. All of a sudden, I felt this need in me to, and even my body when I sat, I can recall the need in me to get better, to fight, to stay alive, to be well enough to change stuff so that I could die as me, which is why it's really important to me that my birth certificate says all of that story, that, I'm not going to buy into some capitalist thing of a gender recognition certificate. They can fuck right off with that. Because, my story is a story of trans brilliance, really. So, yeah.
I guess, it sounds like you're not even 60 yet, but you're planning your funeral and your tombstone.
No.
You do have to think about these things, don't you? Because you don't want to be, I know someone that died at the age of 47 and they weren't really out to their family, and their funeral was totally, for want of a better term, whitewashed or straight-washed.
Yeah.
And there was no reference to them being a lesbian
and also,
gay or being part of our community. And it's horrible.
You have to bear in mind as well that that was around the time when an awful lot of people that were dying of AIDS were being taken away home, and their parents were so ashamed of them dying of AIDS and being gay. They found out at the same time. They found out exactly the same moment that their child was dying of AIDS and was also gay. I have at least 3 friends who I love dearly. I've got no concept of where they're buried. I've got no concept. Their parents just came and took the body and buried it somewhere, and I've got no concept of where they were buried or where they went. And I love them dearly. They're really important to me. And also, I've lived with death. For 30 odd years I've lived with. I was giving a DS 1500. I'm not bleak and depressing. I own the most beautiful house outright in Andalusia. I'm a really happy soul, but I've also had to live with death my whole life. And whatever people say about, about you equals you or about defeating stigma, but it's still the same old shit. You walk out the door. I still can't tell people in my village that, that when I'm having a bad day, that it's because of that, because people have a view of HIV. So people that live with HIV, be they diagnosed today or 10 years ago or 40 years ago, still have to live with the stigma that's put upon them by other people.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this podcast is called Coming Out Stories, and it's generally about sexuality or gender. But I mean, actually, you kind of have to come out being HIV positive, or do you? You feel like you can't come out in rural Spain.
Well, I kind of do. In a way, I have to, and I do. And like I don't want any kind of kudos for this, but I've lived a brave life. Because when I came here, people were like, "You can't go there. You need Soho. You need to be near near Dean Street, and you need this." And it's like, when I go here and I've been here and I've had, at certain points I've not been in great health since I've been here, and so I've had to go and have things like scans done, and they've gone. I remember going to have a scan done of my liver or my kidneys. I can't remember which one it was, and the woman was like, "Oh," in Spanish. She was like, "Oh my God, you've got like a prostate," and I'm like. I just thought just for a tiny minute, I wanted to say, "Oh my God, I didn't know I had one of those." Fuck, that's why I never became a mother. It all makes sense now. But in a way, it's like, I don't have a choice. I mean, the drugs that I'm on, the thing is that I'm on drugs that define me as being HIV positive and trans. Of course, I have to come out in my local medical centre, I have to come out in many different situations if I want to kind of explain. And also, I'm not ashamed of any of that stuff. That stuff got me this house. I bought this house. I'm the only one in my family that owns a house. That stuff bought me this house outright. That stuff bought me this life. That stuff made me write 4 books. That stuff made me be brave and I think fucking beautiful. And the older I get and the greyer I get and the more lines I get, the more beautiful I feel and the more alive I feel.
100% with you on that one, Juno. Yeah. I mean, the way that women are just told that they're not worthy anymore when they get older and a few wrinkles.
I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. And in a way, it's like, I think in a way, like there's another coming out that happens because it's like, I'll be 60 next year and people go, "Oh, age is just a number." And you go, no, it's kind of not just a number because stuff starts to happen. Your 60s really belong to your 70s and 80s. There's kind of trimesters in life. There's like a middle and there's like an early. Your 20s kind of belong to themselves and they're brilliant and they're wonderful. All you should do in your 20s is hedonistic and just have a good time. Have fun, visit places, have sex, do drugs if you want to do drugs, drink, do whatever you want to do. Be shameless and don't care because there's enough people that will shame you throughout your whole lives. But your 60s really, like I've got a few months left of being in my 50s and your 50s kind of feel like they belong to your 40s and, in a kind of cheeky way, if they belong to your 40s, they belong to your 30s. So in a way, there's like a coming up, which I found really, which has been tough really, which is like, no, I'm entering that part of my life. I'm adoring that because I never thought I'd get here. It's like as a trans person living with HIV who's had appalling medical care really, because those things meant that you existed on the outside of stuff. But you do, definitely. It's like a different time. It's like a different kind of resolution. I'm really ready for it. I'm up for it.
You're up for being an OAP. Brilliant.
I am up for, but I'm completely up for, well, I might have been up for being exactly what it is like we're fragile beings. I'm not interested in, and this is no shade to anyone that wants to have work done to their face or anything at all. But to me, that would feel like giving in, and it would feel capitalist, and it would feel, like a whole bunch of things that I don't want to be part of, that I've never wanted to be part of. My life has always felt resolutely punk and queer. I listened when I was a teenager. I would listen to soul. I'd listen to Marvin Gaye. But I also loved Crass and Anti-Anxiety, and I loved reggae, but I also loved listening to Debussy. I wanted, my life has been built on this kind of eclectic mix of being on the outside. Because if you're eclectic, that puts you on the outside, because you can't be really put into a shoebox easily. So, yeah.
I mean, from when you had that conversation in 1992 or whatever it was with the therapist to actually transitioning and becoming the woman or non-binary person you are today, that's quite a long journey, I guess, in itself, isn't it? Because you don't just sort of say, come out as trans and then live as a woman the next day, or do you?
No, it was difficult. It took one, because I was HIV positive. So at that point in time, you couldn't get any surgery or anything because it was deemed as being elective. And I couldn't get a dentist for 10 years. I've got big gaps in the tops of my teeth that I've never replaced. I've never done anything about, because they remind me of not being able to get a dentist for 10 years. And then when I did get a dentist, I remember distinctly having my first appointment with a dentist. They made me have it at 5 o'clock, their last appointment of the day. My notes had a big red cross on them. This is not a word of a lie. This is complete. This is what AIDS and HIV was like back then. And by the way, no one said HIV back then. They said AIDS.
Yeah.
They said AIDS and gay plagues. And no one said, I get that people don't like people to say, but that back then, that was the kind of stuff that people said. But and I went into this dentist room, and they'd covered every single surface with cling film, literally every single surface, and I wanted to cry. I remember going into the London hospital, I don't know what year it was, because I was HIV positive. I had to have a lump removed from my forehead, and no nurse would wait. They made me again wait till the end of the day, and I had to swab. They gave me like a local, and I had to swab my own thing. And that the surgeon that was doing it apologised to me. So you couldn't get anything done then. So for 10 years, I remember going to see my GPs in Balham. I remember going to a GP in maybe Croydon or somewhere. I tried different parts of London, and they all were like, you're going to regret. One GP said to me, you're going to regret the risks you've taken with drugs in your life, becoming HIV, because no one's going to operate on you. And he's like, and he actually said that to me. And
did you tell him to fuck off? Because I imagine you did.
I don't know that I did then, because I felt so distraught. And also for a lot of those years, I was still kind of using drugs, but I was living a really chaotic life. Towards the end of my drug use, I had literally ended up doing the worst kind of work. I was doing whatever I could do to get drug money. So it was all a bit chaotic. And so I would go, oh, maybe I do deserve this. Maybe this is the kind of ultimate kind of punishment for this. But not for long did I think that. I then thought, what I need to do is clean up my act. My friend, who I spoke about a while ago, had become a teacher. And I thought, I woke up one morning and I thought, I need to become a teacher. And now this is completely...
Wow.
Because I've never done this. The reason why I live here in this beautiful house in Andalusia is because it doesn't sit well with me for a long time to be defeated by stuff. So there's a part of me that goes, I feel really defeated, but I can't be like that for very long. There's a part of me that then goes, what the fuck are you going to do about this? You need to do something about this. What do you do about this? So I became a teacher and started paying privately. I used to go to a clinic in Wimpole Street. I used to go to a private clinic there and get hormones. Yeah, I did that for a few years. That was hideously expensive. Could barely afford to do it. Could barely afford anything. And then the rest is kind of history, really. I kind of tried to come out at school as a teacher and be trans, and was kind of got rid of. And then I did all the work.
Actually fired, or they found other ways to get rid of you?
They said it was over the summer holidays, and I had contacted them through my union, and they all decided that it would be better for my mental health if I just left teaching.
Oh, crikey.
And I was like, I've got a mortgage, I don't know. So anyway, again, I was really a bit defeated by that, but there I was, I'd kind of like, whatever, I just thought, and I was really angry about that. So that's when I created that whole body of work, Why Trans Teachers Matter. for which I won the Blair Peach Award, which is like the only thing I've ever won in my life was the Blair Peach Award for equality's work.
And of course, you're trying to fund a transition on your own then, because the NHS wouldn't help you, so you need money to, for everything.
So by this point, this is the irony of life and the irony of where we imagine that metropolitan centres are our whatever. So then I've got this flat I can't afford to live in. By this point, my mum, who had worked in pubs and been in publicum in South London, was now living in a retirement village just to the west of London. So I had to rent out all of my flat and go and move in with my mum, and was really on the edge, but was also really happy because I'd started to grow tits. Everything started to change, and I had this kind of bit on almost. And my mum had this really lovely old country doctor, and I went to see him to get antidepressants, and he said to me, "What's wrong with you? Why are you depressed?" And I said, "Well, because I'm this thing called maybe I would have said transsexual still, I don't know, but I'm transgender or trans, and I've been told that no one will ever operate on me, so I can't ever have surgery, I can't be considered for surgery, and it's difficult for me to even take part in the NHS thing, because there's no end point for me at all." Because back then, even when I started that, which was a good however many years ago, you had to kind of be committed to the end goal, really. You had to kind of commit to the whole. And he said to me, and honestly, he's like a really old country doctor. And he said, "What a load of old rubbish. I've never heard such a load of old rubbish. I'm not putting up with that." And honestly, within like a year, he had me completely in the system. So I had surgery and it all happened.
And how happy were you after that surgery?
Yeah, it was a beautiful moment. For me, it was because I realised that what I was transgender. I wasn't any of the other words. I read someone had written this morning about being non-binary, and they're like, "Yeah, I've got nothing to do with gender," and that's how I felt. And really, that's how I realised that I'd always felt outside of gender. And I loved the gay scene, but I wasn't part of it. And I loved this, so I kind of felt like I was trans, and I felt like this beautiful kind of floatingness that I'd had all my life could finally be fixed down in my cunt, which is why I've written so much about it, not because I in any way want the world to be in there with me, but because I found me in there. And it was the most beautiful coming out moment ever. So, and I remember distinctly that there's this day when the doctor comes round, the surgeon who's operated on you, and he comes round and he, people call it like the depth test day, when they see how much depth you've got in your vaginal cavity, which is ridiculous because at that point you've only just had surgery. Yeah, so it's like ridiculous really, because at that point it's as deep as it's ever going to be, because it hasn't started to heal yet and shrink and whatever. But he, did all the stuff. He was lovely about it. He put the whatever it is, the dilator or whatever you would call it, inside me, and then I rolled my head to one side and I felt tears, and they were tears of complete joy. Not because, and he said to me, I can't remember what he said. He said, "You've got enough depth for an average penis." And I thought, the number of cocks, literally, there's no such thing as an average. I mean, I'm not buying that one for a second. Because I've had punters say to me, "Tell me it's the biggest." And I've gone, "Yeah, it is. Are you done now? Can we move on from this?" But, God. Yeah, so that was a real coming out moment. The moment when I realised that the answer to all of it was that I was this thing that existed. And I love my body now. I love my genitals. But for me, they're a mixture of everything that there's ever been. And that's why not that I want to go, but how we're remembered by the things that people write down about us. And it's really important to me to have the beginnings, the origin story, as well as the ending story.
Yeah. Well, I always like to end with some words of advice. And I think, what would you say to a young trans person listening to this who's, quite frankly, having to navigate a very difficult world for trans people at the moment?
Yeah, I honestly, I would say can't block that out, because if you have stepped off into this world and into this journey, you are already amazing, and you are already bravely changing everything around you. Everything is improved by you. Every part of this world is improved by trans people. And that's not the story that they're saying, because they're terrified about that, because frankly, they've screwed up everything. They gave us Trump. and Sunak and all of the other stuff, all of the other shit that's happening, what trans people, what you in your life are going to bring to this world is nothing but beauty and brilliance and change and difference. And you loosen stuff. You loosen the stuff that made my life, my early life, a complete fucking nightmare. You just loosen stuff. And so be brave, block them out. If you can, get off of Twitter, because it's a waste of space now. I've done it for years, and I literally came off a while ago, and there's nothing to miss there. Come off of it and just know that you're going to produce brilliant. The best art that's being produced now is by trans people. The best music is by trans people. The best books are being written by trans people. Trans people are changing the world for the absolute better. I'm so looking back. I'm going to be 60 next year, and I look back and I go, what a fucking world that they're going to create. I know that people are worried about climate change, but alongside climate change is the change that trans people bring. And that's an amazingly powerful thing.
Wow. And she really is an amazingly powerful and inspiring person. A massive thank you to Juno for speaking to me. I know she doesn't do many interviews anymore, so it did feel a real honour to spend some time with her. Do go and check out their back catalogue of books. Both Sam and I are currently reading A Working Class Family Ages Badly, which is out now. We will, of course, make sure we bring you more trans and non-binary stories throughout the series. Don't forget, if you want to get in contact, you might even want to suggest yourself for an interview. You can do so via our website, and that is comingoutStoriesPodcast.com. Please do follow us on all the socials as well. We are at Come Out Stories on X, previously known as Twitter. Don't start me. And we are Coming Out Stories Pod on Instagram. Go and find us. And stick around, because next episode you'll meet Reverend Jide Macaulay, also known as the Happy Holy Homosexual. He's from Nigeria and is an actual reverend who has never lost his faith, despite the fact that awful things have been done to him in the name of religion.
After I've really immersed myself in this church community, they found out that I was gay and I was excommunicated. This time, worse than the first one, I was subjected to conversion therapy. Yes, where I was physically beaten.
What?
And the physical beating was in order to beat out the homosexuality in
This was in London?
This was in London.
In the 1990s?
This was actually 2000.